The village of Rosenfeld, nestled in the foothills of the Bavarian Alps, was a place where life moved with the rhythm of the seasons. For Agnes Hauser, the rhythm was marked by the cries of newborns and the hushed gratitude of mothers. As a midwife, her hands were the first many villagers ever felt. It was a cold autumn, the year of our Lord 1486. Agnes's knowledge extended beyond childbirth. She possessed a deep understanding of herbs and their healing properties, a wisdom passed down through generations of women in her family. Her remedies were sought by all, from the poorest peasant to the lord of the manor. Yet a disquiet was stirring in Rosenfeld, a fear that gnawed at the edges of their simple lives. Crops were failing. Livestock sickened and died. Misfortunes once attributed to the whims of nature were now whispered about with a growing unease. The well, once a source of life, was now rumored to be poisoned, a blight upon the land and its people. Superstition, like a creeping vine, began to choke the faith that had sustained them for so long. Agnes, with her knowledge of herbs, was often consulted, but even her remedies seemed to offer little relief, fueling the growing suspicion that something darker was at play. Father Matthias, the local priest, struggled to maintain order and faith amidst the rising tide of fear. He preached of God's love and mercy, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Whispers began, like tendrils of smoke, spreading through the village. Accusations, fueled by fear and old grudges, were exchanged in hushed tones. Unusual events are starting to occur. A strange presence is among us. There are darker things at play. Then one cold morning a stranger arrived. A rider, cloaked in black, his presence radiating an aura of authority and dread. "I am Heinrich Kramer," he announced, his voice booming across the village square, "Inquisitor of the Holy See. I have come to cleanse this land of evil." Father Matthias, initially relieved by the arrival of a man who promised to restore order, welcomed Kramer into his church. Little did he know, the darkness that had descended upon Rosenfeld was about to deepen. Kramer carried with him a book, bound in leather and clasped with iron, the Asterisk Malleus Maleficarum Asterisk, the Hammer of Witches, a treatise that would soon become the justification for unimaginable horrors. The wind carried the scent of rain and wood smoke as Heinrich Kramer entered Rosenfeld. He was an inquisitor of the Holy See, dispatched to cleanse this corner of the Holy Roman Empire of a stain he believed festered beneath its pious veneer: witchcraft. His heart was a crucible of zealous conviction, hardened by years spent rooting out heresy. For Kramer, the Malleus Maleficarum was not merely a book but a sacred weapon in his holy war. Father Matthias, the village priest, stood at the church entrance, his hands clasped tightly before him. He was a man torn between faith and apprehension. The rumors of witchcraft had troubled him, and he secretly welcomed the Inquisitor's arrival, hoping it would bring clarity and restore order to his parish. He believed in the church's authority, yet a nascent unease stirred within him, a whisper of doubt he tried to suppress. Kramer dismounted, his gaze piercing. He saw in Father Matthias a tool, a means to an end. He offered a curt nod, his silence more intimidating than any reprimand. The eradication of witchcraft demanded absolute obedience and unwavering faith, qualities he expected to find in the local priest. Father Matthias bowed deeply, his heart pounding in his chest. "Welcome, Inquisitor Kramer. We are honored by your presence." His voice trembled slightly, betraying his inner turmoil. He prayed his anxieties would not be perceived as weakness. Kramer swept past him, his eyes already assessing the church's interior. He saw not a sanctuary but a potential battleground. He would cleanse this village, root and stem, and any who stood in his way would face the full weight of his righteous fury. The church was old, its stones worn smooth by centuries of prayers and lamentations. The flickering candlelight cast grotesque shadows, making the familiar seem sinister. It was a place of solace for some, but for Kramer, it was merely a stage for his grim work. "Tell me, Father," Kramer's voice boomed, echoing through the church, "what whispers have reached your ears? What signs of the devil's work have you witnessed in this parish?" He demanded answers, his eyes boring into Matthias. Father Matthias hesitated, the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. He spoke of strange occurrences, of crop failures and unexplained illnesses, of whispers of ancient rituals in the woods. He carefully omitted his own doubts, his own reservations about the truth of these rumors. Kramer listened with growing satisfaction. He heard not the genuine concerns of a shepherd for his flock, but the seeds of fear, the fertile ground in which his witch hunt would take root. He knew how to nurture such fears, how to twist them into accusations, confessions, and ultimately flames. Unaware of the Inquisitor's arrival, Agnes Hauser tended her herb garden. The scent of lavender and rosemary filled the air, a stark contrast to the growing stench of fear and paranoia that was about to engulf Rosenfeld. Her knowledge of healing, once valued, would soon become her curse. Later that night, in the Lord's Manor, Kramer reviewed a list of names provided by local informants. He circled a few, his lips curling into a cruel smile. The hunt had begun, and he was eager to unleash the hammer of witches upon Rosenfeld. Father Matthias knelt before the altar, his prayers laced with growing dread. He had invited a storm into his village, and he feared he would be powerless to control its fury. He prayed for guidance, for strength, but above all, for the safety of his flock, even as he knew a reckoning was at hand. Heinrich Kramer, fueled by his mission, began his subtle campaign. He spoke of the insidious nature of evil, lurking in the shadows, disguised as piety or usefulness. His words, carefully chosen, sowed seeds of suspicion among the villagers. Agnes, oblivious to the storm brewing around her, continued her work. She gathered herbs, prepared remedies, and attended to the needs of her neighbors. Her knowledge, once valued, was now becoming a source of unease. Father Matthias listened to Kramer's pronouncements with growing unease. He witnessed the subtle glances, the whispered comments, the rising tide of fear. He began to question the Inquisitor's methods, but his doubts were quickly suppressed by his loyalty to the Church. Kramer's interrogations began subtly. He questioned villagers about their neighbors, their habits, their beliefs. He sought out those who held grudges, those who felt slighted, those who were easily swayed. With carefully constructed questions, he extracted half-truths and misinterpretations. Agnes began to feel the change in the village's atmosphere. Once friendly faces turned away, warm greetings became curt nods. She could feel the weight of unspoken accusations, the chill of suspicion in the air. Father Matthias, torn between his duty and his conscience, visited Agnes. He warned her of the whispers, the accusations, the danger she faced. He advised her to be cautious, to pray for guidance, to avoid any appearance of wrongdoing. Kramer intensified his sermons, speaking of the devil's influence, the signs of witchcraft, the need for vigilance. He skillfully manipulated the villagers' fears, turning them against one another. Rumors spread like wildfire. Agnes's knowledge of herbs was twisted into tales of dark magic. Her healing skills were portrayed as pacts with the devil. Her independent spirit was seen as defiance of God's will. Agnes, sensing the growing hostility, sought solace in prayer. She clutched her rosary, pleading for guidance and protection. But even her faith could not dispel the fear that gnawed at her heart. Kramer watched Agnes, studying her every move, searching for any sign of guilt. He was convinced that she was a witch, and he would stop at nothing to prove it. Father Matthias, struggling to reconcile his faith with the injustice he witnessed, confronted Kramer. He pleaded for mercy, for understanding, for a fair trial. But Kramer remained unmoved, his heart hardened by fanatical zeal. The inevitable moment arrived. A mob, fueled by fear and superstition, marched towards Agnes's cottage, their hearts filled with righteous anger. The witch hunt had begun in earnest, and Agnes was its first victim. The whispers had grown louder, the stares more pointed. Agnes felt the weight of the village's suspicion like a physical burden. Each day brought a fresh wave of unease, a subtle shift in the way neighbors greeted her, or rather, avoided her gaze. Kramer, like a spider spinning his web, meticulously gathered his evidence. He preyed on the vulnerable, twisting words and manipulating fears to weave a tapestry of accusations against Agnes. Father Matthias wrestled with his conscience. He had initially welcomed Kramer, believing in the need to purify the parish. Now he saw only fear and injustice, and the seeds of doubt began to sprout within him. The accusation was swift and brutal. A failed crop, a sick child, a cow that gave sour milk, all were attributed to Agnes's evil eye and her supposed pact with the devil. Kramer, seizing the moment, publicly denounced Agnes, reading aloud from the Malleus Maleficarum, citing her knowledge of herbs and her independent spirit as evidence of her diabolical nature. Agnes, stunned and heartbroken, offered no resistance as the guards dragged her away. The rosary slipped from her trembling fingers, a symbol of her shattered faith and lost hope. Father Matthias watched the procession, his heart heavy with guilt. He knew Agnes. He knew her kindness, her healing touch. Could she truly be a servant of the devil? The thought gnawed at his soul. Confined to the cold, unforgiving darkness of the dungeon, Agnes clung to her faith, praying for strength and guidance. The weight of the accusations pressed down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. The trial began swiftly. Kramer, acting as judge, prosecutor, and jury, skillfully manipulated the proceedings, turning every piece of evidence against Agnes. Agnes, despite her fear, bravely defended herself, refuting the accusations with unwavering conviction. She spoke of her service to the community, her healing skills, and her devotion to God. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Father Matthias remained silent, trapped between his duty to the church and his growing belief in Agnes's innocence. His silence was a betrayal, a silent endorsement of the injustice unfolding before him. The trial reached its horrifying climax with the application of torture. Kramer, intent on extracting a confession, subjected Agnes to unspeakable pain, pushing her to the brink of madness. The shadow of the hammer had fallen, and the village held its breath, waiting for Agnes to break. The dungeon's air was thick with the stench of mildew and despair. Agnes huddled against the cold stone, the silence broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water. Fear, a constant companion, gnawed at her insides. The Inquisitor's shadow fell across Agnes's cell. Kramer, a vessel of unshakable conviction, held the Malleus Maleficarum as if it were a sacred text. His eyes, cold and unwavering, promised no mercy. "Confess, woman," Kramer demanded, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Confess your pact with the devil. Confess your unholy acts." Agnes, though trembling, met his gaze. "I have nothing to confess," she whispered. "I am innocent." Kramer's patience wore thin. He gestured to the guards, their faces impassive, their hands resting on the instruments of torture. The rack, the thumbscrews, the strappado, each a testament to the Inquisitor's unwavering methods. The rack stretched Agnes's limbs, pulling her joints to their breaking point. Each turn of the wheel brought a fresh wave of agony. Yet, through the pain, she clung to her innocence, refusing to confess to crimes she did not commit. Father Matthias stood outside the dungeon, his heart heavy with doubt. The screams emanating from within were a stark counterpoint to the sermons he preached. Could such brutality truly be God's will? Was justice being served, or was something far more sinister at play? Kramer emerged, his eyes blazing with fervor. "She is stubborn, Father Matthias," he said, his voice laced with impatience. "But she will confess. They always do. The devil does not easily relinquish his grip." "But at what cost, Inquisitor?" Father Matthias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is a confession extracted through torture truly a testament to guilt, or merely a testament to human endurance?" Kramer scoffed. "Doubt is the devil's tool, Father. Do not let it cloud your judgment. We are doing God's work, purging this village of evil. The ends justify the means." Days turned into nights. Agnes endured waterboarding, the thumbscrews, the burning iron. Each torture pushed her closer to the edge, but she refused to break. Her silence was her defiance, her resilience a testament to the strength of her spirit. Father Matthias knelt in the church, his prayers filled with torment. The faces of the accused, their eyes filled with fear and despair, haunted his waking moments. He could no longer reconcile the church's teachings with the brutality he had witnessed. A decision, fraught with peril, began to take root in his heart. One evening, Father Matthias approached Agnes's cell. His face was pale but resolute. "Agnes," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I can no longer stand by and watch this injustice. I will help you." Father Matthias knelt, the cold stone biting into his knees. His prayers felt hollow, echoing in the vast emptiness of the church. He sought guidance, a sign, anything to quell the storm raging within him. Was he truly serving God or merely a tool of cruelty? Kramer addressed the villagers, his words like hammer blows. He spoke of the insidious nature of witchcraft, the peril it posed to their souls, the necessity of rooting out evil without mercy. His sermon was a blend of scripture and fear, designed to solidify his control. In the confines of her cell, Agnes clung to the only solace she had left, her faith. Each bead of the rosary was a prayer, a plea for strength, a desperate hope for justice. But even hope felt like a fragile thing, easily crushed by the weight of her situation. The Lord's Manor became a battleground of wills as Father Matthias confronted Kramer. "Are you so sure of her guilt?" Matthias demanded, his voice shaking. Kramer retorted, "Doubt is the devil's tool, Father. We must be unwavering in our resolve to purge this evil." Whispers rippled through the village like a disease. Some questioned Kramer's methods, the swiftness of the accusations, the brutality of the interrogations. Doubts, once confined to the shadows, began to creep into the light. "Agnes has delivered our babies, healed our sick, and comforted the dying," old Elsa declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "Are we to believe she is suddenly a servant of the devil? I won't stand for it." Her words sparked a flicker of defiance in the hearts of some. A young mother whose child Agnes had saved from a deadly fever watched Elsa with tears in her eyes. She wanted to speak out, to defend Agnes, but fear held her tongue. The cost of dissent was too high. Kramer watched the growing dissension with narrowed eyes. He knew that doubt was a dangerous enemy, one that could unravel his carefully constructed web of fear. He needed to act, to crush the rebellion before it could take root. Father Matthias paced his study, his mind a battlefield of conflicting beliefs. He could no longer reconcile the Church's teachings with the injustice he was witnessing. He was trapped between his duty and his conscience, between obedience and truth. Hans and Greta, two of the few who dared to openly question Kramer, sought out Father Matthias. "Father, you must help her," Hans pleaded. "Agnes is innocent. Kramer is twisting the truth." Greta added, "The village is turning against itself. Fear is consuming us." From the church tower, Father Matthias gazed upon his village, a tapestry of rooftops and fields bathed in the fading light. He knew he could no longer remain silent. He had to choose a side, to risk everything for what he believed was right. In the Lord's manor, Kramer met with the local lord, their faces grim. "The tide is turning," Kramer said, his voice low and menacing. "We must make an example, a demonstration of our power, to silence the dissenters and reaffirm our authority." The fate of Agnes and the village hung precariously in the balance. The day of Agnes Hauser's trial dawned gray and heavy, mirroring the mood of the village. A hush fell over the crowd as she was led into the square, the symbol of justice, the gallows, casting a long, ominous shadow. Heinrich Kramer, a figure of imposing authority, presided over the trial. The Malleus Maleficarum, his handbook for witch hunts, lay open before him, a testament to the predetermined outcome. Father Matthias stood at the edge of the square, a silent observer. His heart wrestled with doubt as he witnessed the unfolding spectacle, torn between his duty to the church and his growing sense of injustice. Agnes, though weary and weakened by her time in the dungeon, stood defiant. "I am no witch," she declared, her voice echoing in the tense silence. "I have only used my knowledge to heal and help." Kramer dismissed her plea. "Your knowledge of herbs," he sneered, "is but a veil for your dark practices. Where did you learn these secrets, woman? From whom did you receive your unholy power?" "I learned from my mother, and she from hers," Agnes replied, her voice gaining strength. "These are the ways of healing passed down through generations, blessed by God, not cursed by the devil." Kramer slammed his fist on the table. "Lies, all lies," he roared. "The devil works through deceit, and you, woman, are his instrument." The crowd, swayed by Kramer's rhetoric, began to murmur amongst themselves. Fear, like a contagious disease, spread through the square, fueled by years of superstition and religious fervor. Father Matthias, his conscience finally overwhelming his fear, stepped forward. "My Lord Inquisitor," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I have known Agnes for many years. She is a woman of faith and compassion." Kramer silenced him with a dismissive wave. "Silence, priest. Your misplaced sympathy will not sway justice. The evidence speaks for itself." Agnes looked at Father Matthias, a flicker of gratitude in her weary eyes. His small act of defiance offered a sliver of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Kramer rose to his feet, his voice booming across the square. "Agnes Hauser," he declared, "you have been found guilty of witchcraft. Your penance begins now." The rack stretched Agnes's limbs, each agonizing pull tearing at her muscles and spirit. Her confession was not a truth, but a surrender, a broken vessel yielding to the relentless pressure. Kramer watched, his gaze unwavering. He dictated the terms of Agnes's confession, weaving a narrative of sabbats, pacts with the devil, and malevolent curses. Each word was a carefully placed stone in the edifice of her guilt. I consorted with the devil," Agnes choked out, the words foreign and repugnant on her tongue. She repeated the accusations, a litany of lies forced from her lips by pain and terror. Father Matthias, haunted by Agnes's screams, sought solace and truth in the scriptures and ancient tomes. He desperately searched for a loophole, a precedent, anything that could challenge Kramer's authority and save Agnes from the pyre. He questioned the villagers, subtly seeking inconsistencies in the accusations against Agnes. But fear had gripped their hearts, and they offered only averted gazes and mumbled platitudes. Agnes existed in a state of numb resignation. The pain had become a constant companion, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. She clung to her rosary, seeking a comfort that seemed increasingly distant. Driven by a desperate hope, Father Matthias ventured into Agnes's abandoned garden. He knew her knowledge of herbs was extensive, but he refused to believe it was evidence of diabolical dealings. He searched for anything that could be twisted into proof of her innocence. Kramer preached a sermon filled with fire and brimstone, reminding the villagers of the ever-present threat of witchcraft and the importance of unwavering faith. He skillfully stoked their fear, solidifying their conviction in Agnes's guilt. Father Matthias confronted Kramer, questioning the validity of Agnes's confession and the methods used to obtain it. Kramer dismissed his concerns with a wave of his hand, accusing Matthias of being soft on heresy. The cycle of torture and forced confession continued, each session eroding Agnes's sanity and twisting her words further. She was trapped in a vortex of pain and lies, with no escape in sight. Father Matthias wrestled with his conscience, torn between his duty to the church and his growing conviction that Agnes was innocent. He knew that speaking out would mean risking his own life and reputation, but the thought of her suffering haunted him relentlessly. Kramer prepared to present Agnes's confession to the village, a culmination of his efforts to eradicate evil from Rosenfeld. He believed he was acting in God's name, oblivious to the devastating consequences of his actions. The weight of Agnes's forced confession pressed heavily on Father Matthias. Doubt gnawed at his soul, a stark contrast to the certainty he once held. He could no longer ignore the dissonance between Kramer's actions and the Church's teachings of mercy and justice. Kramer meticulously reviewed the evidence, twisting scripture and manipulating testimonies to solidify his case against Agnes. His conviction remained unshaken, fueled by a dangerous blend of religious zeal and personal ambition. Driven by his conscience, Father Matthias sought an audience with Kramer. He intended to voice his concerns and, if possible, present the inquisitor with evidence that contradicted the accusations against Agnes. He knew he was walking a dangerous path, but he could no longer stand idly by. Kramer listened with thinly veiled contempt as Matthias presented his arguments. He dismissed the priest's concerns as naive sentimentality, blinded by misplaced compassion. He saw Matthias as a weakling, easily swayed by emotion. "Inquisitor," Matthias implored, "I have spoken with villagers who attest to Agnes's kindness and healing abilities. Her knowledge of herbs is not witchcraft but a gift. The children she helped deliver, the sick she nursed, these are not the acts of a servant of the devil." Kramer cut him off, his voice a low growl. "Heresy thrives in the shadows of doubt, Father. Your misplaced faith in this woman blinds you to the truth. The devil is cunning and his servants often appear innocent. Do not question the authority of the Holy See. Your duty is to guide your flock, not to defend the wicked." Matthias refused to back down. But what of justice, Inquisitor? What of the truth? Is the Church so afraid of the truth that it must resort to torture and coerced confessions? Agnes is innocent. I believe it in my heart. Kramer's patience finally snapped. Be warned, Father. Your words border on sedition. Questioning the methods of the Inquisition is a dangerous game. You risk not only your reputation but your very soul. I suggest you return to your flock and pray for guidance before you find yourself accused of heresy as well. Matthias left the manor, his heart heavy. He had failed to sway Kramer, but he refused to abandon Agnes. He knew he had to find another way to expose the truth, even if it meant risking everything. In the dungeon, Agnes clung to the last vestiges of hope. She prayed for strength and for someone to believe in her innocence. The weight of the false confession pressed down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. Under the cover of darkness, Father Matthias gathered a small group of villagers who still believed in Agnes's innocence. He shared his concerns about Kramer's methods and pleaded with them to come forward with any information that might help her cause. He knew it was a risky move, but he had to try. The next day, as the trial was set to resume, Father Matthias prepared to make his final stand. He had gathered what little evidence he could, and he had the support of a few brave souls. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but he was determined to speak the truth, no matter the consequences. The fate of Agnes, and perhaps the soul of Rosenfeld, hung in the balance. The air hung thick with anticipation as Agnes stood before the makeshift tribunal. The villagers, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, watched in silence, their breath misting in the cold air. The weight of the false confession pressed down on her, a heavy shroud woven from lies and terror. Heinrich Kramer, his gaze unwavering, held aloft the Malleus Maleficarum. Its pages, filled with twisted logic and accusations, were the foundation upon which he built his judgment. His voice, amplified by the tense silence, boomed across the square. Father Matthias stood paralyzed, the weight of his complicity crushing him. He had hoped for justice, for truth to prevail, but the trial had become a spectacle, a mockery of divine law. His conscience screamed for him to act, to speak out against the injustice, but fear held him captive. Agnes Hauser, Kramer declared, his voice devoid of emotion, you have been found guilty of witchcraft, of consorting with the devil, and of causing harm to this community. The sentence is death by fire. May God have mercy on your soul. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Agnes closed her eyes, a single tear escaping, a testament to her stolen life, her shattered reputation. There was no escape, no reprieve, only the inevitable embrace of the flames. But as Agnes was led towards the pyre, a figure emerged from the crowd. Father Matthias, his face pale but resolute, stepped forward, his voice trembling but clear. Stop. This is not justice. This is murder. Kramer's face contorted in fury. Traitor, heretic, you dare question the authority of the church, he thundered, his voice laced with venom. This woman is a servant of the devil. Her execution is God's will. But Matthias stood his ground. This trial was a sham. The confession was forced through torture. Agnes is innocent. I saw it with my own eyes. Are we to stand by and allow innocent blood to be spilled in the name of God? I will not. His words hung in the air, piercing the veil of fear that had gripped the village. Doubt began to creep into the hearts of the villagers. They looked at Agnes, at Matthias, and then at Kramer, their faces etched with uncertainty. A murmur spread through the crowd, growing louder, more insistent. Some villagers, emboldened by Matthias's courage, began to question the verdict. A few even stepped forward and began to untie Agnes from the stake. Seeing the tide turning against him, Kramer flew into a rage, but his words fell on deaf ears. The villagers, finally free from the grip of fear, seized him and dragged him away, his authority shattered, his power broken. The witch hunt in Rosenfeld was over. The scars remained, a reminder of the darkness that had threatened to consume them. But the courage of Father Matthias and the resilience of Agnes had shown them the importance of standing up for what is right, of questioning authority, and of choosing compassion over fear. The village slowly healed, carrying the weight of its past, but also the seeds of a more just and equitable future.